I recently came across this discussion thread in LinkedIn. The question is, what are your suggestions for changing a teacher-centered class to a student-centered class? So I was interested in looking and analyzing really the 38 comments that were made at the time of this analysis and look at some of the types of responses that were being made. In order to do this, I used deduce, and the first thing I want to do is show you a word cloud that was generated from the information. So I basically uploaded all the information from the threads to deduce to do this analysis, and I'll show just a few graphs and charts to kind of explain a little bit further my analysis from a discourse analysis perspective. So this first graph is basically a word cloud, and it represents some of the key words that were derived from the replies, and the image actually that I used to upload in the blog is also a different version of the word cloud. Some of the key concepts that I saw, there was a lot of discussion about focusing the class around the readiness of the student, focusing on prior knowledge, but also focusing on the student's needs, interests, and learning preferences. There was some discussion about seating arrangement, specifically having the teacher sit with the students, not so much standing in front, but kind of sitting and talking with them at their level, literally, and also promoting collaborative and cooperative learning. That was mentioned quite a bit. Lesson planning as well, negotiation, actually negotiating with the students as far as what is to be learned, what types of topics to be covered. That was mentioned quite a bit. So moving on now to the first chart here, I'd like to share some of the key ideas that I came across, and I came up with a coding scheme which appears along the top of the screen. The left-hand side of the screen are the respondents, and I broke the codes down into different categories. So I have assessment, contextual considerations, opinions, orientation, philosophy, purpose, self-reflection, and teaching methodology. Most of the subcodes came under teaching methodology, and that's where I'll begin. One of the things I saw quite a bit, a lot of the comments related again to the readiness level of the student, prior knowledge, basing what they're doing on knowledge that they had seen in prior experiences, and also focusing on the needs, interests, and learning preferences of the style. I think, in fact, learning preferences wasn't used, but I think the term learning styles was used. But that was something that was discussed quite often. Teacher roles was also included, and the word facilitator came up throughout many of the discussions. Also, there's a lot of talk about reducing teacher talk time versus student talk time. So the most, with the exception of one person, was really interested in sharing experiences relating to how the teachers can speak less and the students can speak more. There was an interesting comment from one individual who basically questioned the whole dichotomy between teacher talk time and student talk time, basically arguing that teacher talk time inherently is not a bad thing, that we need to look at it more deeply to see exactly what is being discussed when teachers talk, as well as when students are talking, not just to assume that that is in and of itself a good thing, that we need to look more specifically at what's being discussed, and I tend to agree. Negotiation was discussed quite a bit, so working with the students, working with them, and finding out what they would like to talk about, what type of content they would like to discover. And although the term differentiated instruction was not used, I think I would add that the whole concept of differentiating instruction, differentiating content, process, and product would also fall under that category of negotiation. I think that there's a good link and fit between those two concepts. Lesson planning was discussed a lot in terms of being able to prepare for a class and looking at these other different aspects that we've talked about so far, but really looking at the class and planning for that it just doesn't happen incidentally, that it isn't an intentional effort on the part of the teacher, and lesson planning is quite important. Collaborative learning and cooperative learning was also discussed, and just getting students to interact with each other, open discussions. Questions was brought up a little bit, as well as trying to generate a discussion around the formation of questions. Okay, moving on, some other topics that were discussed quite a bit. As far as teaching, those would be the main categories. These other categories fall under things like personal opinions. So a lot of the responses that individuals made were just also sharing an opinion, which is to be expected. There were some statements that were just agreeing with others, so there's tend to be quite a bit of agreement. Some respondents also talked about the problem of student reticence towards speaking. So just having certain students really not having the motivation to speak in class. So there was quite a bit of discussion about that, just painting a contextualized situation, if you will, around the classroom and problems that tend to emerge, and again, rationalizing why we would want to perhaps focus more on student learning and the students, perhaps less on the teacher. Assessment was discussed quite a bit, primarily in terms of peer assessment. So peer assessment was mentioned in terms of, again, how to shift from a teacher-led class to a student-led class. Okay, the last chart I want to share with you is a chart basically that cross-references a few of these topics, and some of the main keywords that were discussed together were assessment and teacher roles. Also, assessment and readiness level, prior knowledge of the students were also discussed often together. Lesson planning and negotiation was also discussed quite a bit. So even though you are planning, if you are going to negotiate this, there needs to be some sort of planning process, so the teacher knows what to expect, or at least to know how to plan on different possibilities that could emerge from having such a negotiation. Lesson planning and readiness level as well, so again, focusing on the students' prior knowledge, focusing on their needs and interests and learning styles would require planning. So a lot of these concepts were being discussed together. So that's basically it. I wanted to share just a little bit of the information about this thread. Very good question. I think a question that's very much still relevant today. There's been a lot of research being done on this topic, and it's certainly helpful to continue sharing these types of experiences and opinions and thoughts on this matter. And if anyone would like to leave a comment below, feel free to do so. If you have any questions about the analysis or just on the topic of shifting from a teacher-led class to one that's focused more on the students, feel free to share your views. And thanks for watching.